The jewelry box was the last thing she expected to find. Callie Marsh had been cleaning out her mother's apartment for 4 hours by the time she got to the bedroom closet, working her way through the rooms the way she did everything when she was trying not to fall apart. Methodically, starting at the edges and moving inward. The kitchen first, then the bathroom, then the living room shelves. She wrapped mugs in newspaper, sorted books into keep and donate, filled a garbage bag with the cluttered evidence of a life that had wound down slowly and then, in the last 4 months, very fast. Ruth Marsh had kept a tidy apartment. That made it easier and harder at the same time. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Her sister Pamela had called that morning to ask how it was going, which was Pamela's way of confirming the work was in progress without offering to help with any of it. Pamela lived 40 minutes away and had taken exactly 2 days off work for the funeral and the burial and considered that sufficient. She was the kind of woman who organized grief the way she organized everything else, by deciding how much of it was her responsibility and then doing precisely that amount and no more. Callie did not resent this about her sister. She had stopped resenting things about Pamela sometime in her mid-20s, which had required a certain amount of private effort that Pamela knew nothing about. The lease ended at the end of the month. The landlord needed the place cleared. So Callie had taken Thursday and Friday off from her billing job, told the bakery she could not come in this weekend, and driven down on Wednesday night to stay at a motel 2 blocks from her mother's building. She was 31 years old, and she was between paychecks, and the motel room had cost $42, which was more than she had wanted to spend, but she had not found a better option. The bedroom closet was deep and built into the corner, with a high shelf across the top and a rod below for hanging things. Ruth had kept her clothes arranged by sleeve length from left to right, and then within each section by color, a system she had maintained for as long as Callie could remember. She went through the hanging section first, then the folded things on the shelf, and at the very back, tucked behind a stack of winter sweaters her mother had not worn in at least 2 seasons, she found a box she did not recognize. It was small and covered in dark blue fabric, the kind of fabric used on boxes made to hold things worth keeping. The fabric had faded in patches, and on the bottom of the box someone had written 2 initials in black marker, D.H. And beneath the initials, a year. 1951. Neither initial was her mother's. She set it on the bed and looked at it for a moment before she opened the clasp. Inside, the ivory satin lining had yellowed around the seams. A tarnished silver locket on a chain lay in the center, the old kind that hinged open to hold photographs inside. Tucked beside the locket was a folded piece of pale blue paper. Her mother's handwriting on the outside. One word, Callie. And beneath the locket, lying flat and protected by a sheet of waxed paper, folded into a neat rectangle, was a document. She unfolded it slowly. Property deed, Harlan County, Commonwealth of Virginia. Recorded February 14, 1978. Grantor, Delia and Holt. Grantee, Ruth Margaret Holt Marsh. Property described as 80 acres and improvements. Lot 9, Wheeler Creek Road parcel. Bounded to the north by Wheeler Creek and to the south by the county road. At the top of the deed, in pencil, in her mother's handwriting, for Callie. When the time comes. She read it twice. She read it a third time. Her mother had never mentioned land. Not once, across 31 years of conversations, had Ruth Marsh said anything about 80 acres of property in Harlan County. Ruth had grown up in this part of Virginia and rarely discussed her family in detail. A grandmother who died when Ruth was in college. A grandfather dead long before that. A branch of the family tree that Ruth kept trimmed back, never letting it overgrow into the present. Callie had always assumed the silence came from loss. People don't talk about things that hurt them. She had not pressed. She set the deed on the bedside table and opened the folded letter. Her mother's handwriting was careful and deliberate, the cursive of a woman who had learned as a child that penmanship was a form of respect, and who had maintained this belief even when her hands shook in her final months. The letter was dated 11 months ago, before the diagnosis, before any of them knew what was coming. I'm writing this while I can still write clearly, and I'm leaving it where I know you'll find it, and Pamela won't. You've always been the one who looks all the way to the back of the closet. Pamela only ever looks at what's in front of her. There is land, Callie. 80 acres in Harlan County that belonged to my grandmother Delia before she died, and that she left to me in 1978, the year I turned 21. I never told anyone about it. Not Gary. Not Pamela. No one. Delia asked me not to, and I kept that promise because she had earned it, and because I understood, later, exactly why she asked. I have been paying the property taxes every year out of a separate account. The information you need for that account is inside the locket. The land is paid for and clear. The deed in this box is yours to act on. I need you to go there before you do anything else. There are things on that property that I never touched myself. Delia wrote me a letter the year she died and told me what was there and where it was, and she asked me not to open what she had kept. She said the person who needed it would know what to do with it. I always believed that would be me. But I'm writing this letter instead of going there myself, which means I was wrong about that. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry for some things I kept quiet when keeping them quiet wasn't actually kindness. But this, I believe, was right. I needed to know who to give it to, and now I know. Go to the land, Cal. What Delia built out there, what she kept, and what she saved for all those years, it's yours. The letter ended there. No signature. Just her mother's handwriting stopping in the middle of the page as if Ruth had set down the pen trusting that the words had already done what was needed. Callie sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Outside, the March afternoon light came through the gap in the bedroom curtains at a low angle. From somewhere in the building, a television played. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary afternoon, unaware of what had just been found behind a stack of winter sweaters in a dead woman's closet. She opened the locket. Inside, where photographs were meant to go, there was a small folded envelope. She pulled out the slip of paper inside. A bank name, a routing number, an account number, a 4-digit PIN, all written in her mother's small, precise hand. She put everything back in the jewelry box and closed the clasp. She finished packing the bedroom without mentioning the box to anyone. When Pamela called that evening, Callie said she was making progress and would be finished by Friday. Pamela said that was good and asked if any of the furniture was worth anything. Callie said she would look into it. She drove back to the motel with the jewelry box in her overnight bag and the deed and the letter spread on the desk under the room's single lamp, and she read everything a second time and then a third until the words were in her blood the same way her mother's voice was in her blood. Then she lay in the dark and thought about Delia and Holt, a woman she knew almost nothing about except 2 initials on the bottom of an old box, and the date 1951, and the fact that she had kept 80 acres of land in Harlan County and transferred it privately to a 21-year-old granddaughter and asked her to tell no one. She thought about that for a long time before she slept. The county recorder's office in Harlan opened at 8 in the morning. Callie was in the parking lot at 7:45. The woman at the counter was named Barbara, according to a nameplate on the desk, and she had the thorough patience of someone who had spent many years explaining paperwork to people who had not expected to be receiving it. Callie set the deed on the counter. Barbara read it without comment, put on her glasses, and typed something into the computer, and then read the screen without comment either. 1978 recording, she said. Grantor Delia and Holt. Grantee Ruth Margaret Holt Marsh. She scrolled. Property taxes current as of this past December. She looked up. Are you Ruth Marsh? Ruth Marsh was my mother, Callie said. She passed away last month. I'm sorry for your loss, Barbara said, with the quiet sincerity of someone who said this regularly and still meant it. Do you have probate documentation establishing you as her heir? Callie set a folder on the counter. She had located her mother's will the night before. It was a short document, leaving everything in equal shares to Callie and her sister Pamela, and the relevant probate papers the estate attorney had filed were included. She had made copies of everything. Barbara went through the folder the same way she had read the deed, page by page, steady and methodical. She flipped back to the computer twice to verify things. The property transferred to your mother in 1978 by recorded deed, she said. Maintained in her name since. Taxes current. She paused. You'd be inheriting this through the estate. It's a straightforward process. I can give you the forms. Is there anything else on file for this parcel? Callie said. Any liens, any recorded interests from outside parties? Barbara went back to the screen. A short pause. There's a letter of interest, she said, from a company called Harlan Land Group, LLC. Filed about 8 months ago. They noted interest in purchasing the property if it became available. She looked up over her glasses. That's not a claim. It doesn't create any rights. It's just a recorded notice. I understand, Callie said. Thank you. She took the forms and the copies Barbara made, and she drove out of the county seat in the direction of Wheeler Creek Road. The county road ran along a ridge before it dropped into a wide valley, and the valley caught her unprepared. It was the kind of landscape that stops your breath if you're not ready for it. A long, quiet space with the creek running along the low ground, old hardwoods covering the slopes, the bare March branches dense and gray against the sky. The road narrowed to gravel and then to two worn tracks through old grass, and she followed the tracks until they ended at a gate. The gate was a simple farm gate, the tubular kind on a pivot hinge, with a padlock through the chain on the far post. A wooden sign was wired to the gate at eye level, hand-lettered in old white paint. Holt. Private. She got out of the car and stood at the gate and looked through it. The tracks continued on the other side, curving up a low rise toward a stand of oaks, and past the oaks she could just see the roofline of something. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She drove back to the nearest town, a place called Millhaven, with a hardware store and a diner and a feed supply place that doubled as a post office substation. She bought a bolt cutter at the hardware store and drove back to the gate. She had one moment of hesitation before she cut it. The property was hers, or it would be once the probate paperwork was filed, and the deed in her jacket pocket made the chain of title clear. She put the bolt cutter's jaw around the shackle and applied her weight to the handles, and the shackle gave with a sharp crack that rolled out across the empty field and faded. The gate swung open. She drove through and pulled the gate shut behind her out of habit. The farmhouse came into view as she crested the rise, and it was not what she had pictured, and at the same time it was exactly what she should have expected. A one-story structure, board and batten siding gone gray with age, a wide front porch that sagged in the middle but stood plumb at the posts. A tin roof, rusted in patches but holding its shape. The windows were boarded from the inside with old plywood, faded now to the same gray as the siding. The glass itself was unbroken. She got out of the car and stood in the thin March sunlight and looked at it. The house had not fallen. That was the thing about it. It had stopped at some point, stopped being lived in and tended and used, but it had not come apart. The board and batten was sound. The porch posts were set in fieldstone footings that had not shifted. The roof sagged in one section near the back, but the main ridge line was still straight, which said something about how it had been built. She thought about the year Delia had put on that jewelry box. 1951. The house was older than that, but whoever had built it to last past their own lifetime, which was the way people built things when they expected to hand them down. There was a specificity to the construction that she noticed even from a distance, the way the corner boards were fitted, the spacing of the battens, the width of the porch. Someone had thought carefully about what they were making. Not a temporary structure. Something meant to be here long after the builder was gone. She walked the perimeter. The porch boards gave slightly under her weight in 2 or 3 places, but did not break. Around the back, the kitchen garden was gone to grass and scrub, but the faint geometry of old raised beds was still visible in the way the ground rose and settled. Beyond the garden space stood a smaller outbuilding, lower and tighter than the house. Its boards fitted close together in the way of a structure meant to hold cold, a storage building or a spring house. And behind the outbuilding, almost hidden by a stand of cedar that had grown up along the back property line, she saw a pair of doors set into the earth. She walked toward them slowly. Root cellar doors, the old type, set at a shallow angle into the slope behind the outbuilding, built of heavy wooden planks. The wood was nearly black, and she understood after a moment that the color was not just age. The doors had been painted, deliberately, at some point, with something dark. The color of something meant not to attract attention. A hasp and padlock held the doors shut. She went to them and crouched down and looked at the padlock. It was not old. The shackle was clean of rust, and the body of the lock had been treated with some kind of protective coating. She pressed her thumb against it. Dry? No corrosion. Someone had maintained this lock. Replaced it, perhaps, from whatever old padlock Delia had put here in 1962. Her mother, maybe. Ruth driving out here alone one afternoon without telling anyone, finding the original lock failing, going to a hardware store and coming back with a new one and fitting it to the hasp, and driving home, and saying nothing to anyone. That was exactly what her mother would have done. She went back to the car and got the bolt cutter. The lock on the cellar was heavier than the gate lock and took 3 tries, repositioning the jaw each time before the shackle snapped. She set the broken lock on the ground and lifted the doors. Cold air rose from below. The smell was damp earth and something dry underneath it, something she could not immediately name. Stone steps, 8 of them, descended into darkness. She took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam reached the floor and swept the walls. Rough-cut fieldstone, the same kind as the house foundation, fitted tightly without mortar. Wooden shelves on 3 sides, floor to ceiling, solid and square. Some shelves held mason jars, their contents gone dark and desiccated, long past anything useful. The dirt floor was dry. The ceiling was low, but not so low she could not stand. In the far corner, against the back wall, 3 wooden crates sat stacked on a low platform of boards. They were not rotted. The wood had darkened with age but held its structure. Someone had built the platform to keep them off the earth and away from any ground moisture. The crates were wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, the cloth cracked with age but still fitted close around the wood. She stood at the top of the steps and looked at them. She heard a vehicle on the gravel track behind her. She lowered the cellar doors and straightened up. A gray extended cab pickup came over the rise and slowed and stopped 20 feet from her car. A man got out. He was around 50, dressed in a collared shirt and barn jacket and khaki pants, the clothes of someone who worked indoors but had dressed for a farm visit. He had the easy, unhurried walk of someone who expected to be welcomed. "Miss Marsh," he said. She did not answer. She waited. He slowed slightly at the absence of a response, and then continued toward her with his hand extended. "Wade Mercer," he said. "Land consultant. I heard someone was out at the Holt place. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself." "How did you hear that?" she said. A practiced smile. "Small county. Word gets around." He looked at the house, the outbuildings, the cleared land beyond. "Beautiful piece of ground. A lot of potential out here." "This is private property," she said. "I had to cut a padlock to get through the gate." "Your property?" "Yes," he said. "Which is why I thought it worth stopping by." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "I represent some investors who've had an interest in this parcel for several years. They asked me to reach out if it ever became available." He held out the card. She took it. "Harlan Land Group, LLC. Wade Mercer, Acquisitions." The same company that had filed the letter of interest at the county recorder's office 8 months ago. "It's not available," she said. He nodded, the nod of a man who had expected this as a first response. "Of course not. I'm not pressuring you in any direction. I just wanted you to know there are options if circumstances change, or if you'd ever like to hear a number." He paused. "A realistic number. These investors are serious." "I know where to find you," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the assessing focus of a man who spent most of his professional life reading people in exactly this kind of situation, and he seemed to reach some conclusion. He smiled again, easy and finished. "Take care of yourself," he said, and walked back to his truck. She watched the truck go back down the track, through the gate she had left open, and turn onto the county road and disappear. The quiet of the property came back, which was the particular kind of quiet that exists in rural places when the only sound that was there is suddenly gone. Wind in the cedar stand. The creek somewhere below. She looked at the business card. Harlan Land Group had been watching this property for at least 8 months. They had filed a formal letter of interest with the county recorder. They had sent a man out here today within hours of her arriving, which meant someone in Millhaven or at the recorder's office had passed word along, and they had a contact waiting to receive it. They wanted this land. She thought about the 3 wooden crates in the corner of the cellar, sitting on their platform of boards, wrapped in oilcloth, untouched since Delia had put them there. She thought about her mother's letter. What Delia built out there, what she kept, and what she saved for all those years. "It's yours." She went back to the cellar doors and looked at them. The afternoon light was thinning. She had not brought a proper flashlight, only her phone, and the battery was at 40%. The steps were stone, and she had not examined them. She did not know what was in those crates, not exactly. And she was alone on a property with a broken gate padlock and no one who knew where she was. Not today, not right now, but tomorrow. She drove back to Millhaven and stopped at the hardware store before it closed and bought a heavy-duty flashlight and a fresh padlock for the gate. She drove back out to Wheeler Creek Road and replaced the gate padlock, fitting the new one through the chain and locking it. And she drove back to town and bought food at the diner and sat in a corner booth and thought about everything she had read and everything she had seen. At the motel that night, she lay in the dark with her mother's jewelry box on the nightstand and the deed on the desk and the flashlight on the bedside table, charged and ready. She thought about Delia and Holt, who had built a root cellar behind a farmhouse on 80 acres in Harlan County and put things in it and painted the doors black so they wouldn't draw notice, and who had held onto that land through whatever years required holding on to things, and who had finally, at the end of her life, given it to a 21-year-old granddaughter and asked her to keep the secret intact. She thought about her mother paying the property taxes every year for more than 30 years out of a separate account, driving out here, maybe once, replacing a failing padlock on the cellar doors, and driving home and saying nothing. I needed to know who to give it to, and now I know. She thought about Wade Mercer's face when she said the property wasn't available. The smooth, practiced nod of a man who was not finished but knew when to retreat. She thought about the wooden crates. Tomorrow morning, she would go back to the property. She would take the flashlight and she would go down those stone steps, and she would open those crates, and she would find out what Delia had kept and saved for 60-some years in the dark below a painted door on a piece of land that no one in her family had been permitted to talk about. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow. She was back at the gate by 7:15. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of cold that feels purposeful in early spring, like the air has not yet decided to soften. She had slept better than she expected. That surprised her. She had thought she would lie awake going over everything in her mind, but instead she had fallen asleep almost immediately after turning off the lamp, the deep sleep of someone whose body has recognized that the thinking is done for now, and the only thing left is to go and do the thing. She drove through the gate and up the rise to the farmhouse and parked in the same spot she had parked the day before. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. The property was the same as she had left it. Gray board and batten in the morning light. The cedars stand at the back dark and still. No tire tracks but her own. No sign that anyone had been here after she left. She had brought what she needed. The heavy flashlight from the hardware store. A pair of work gloves from the bin near the register. Canvas with rubberized palms. A small notebook and a pen. Her phone. She had charged everything at the motel overnight. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She crossed the yard to the cellar doors behind the outbuilding. The broken padlock was where she had left it on the ground. She lifted the doors and propped them against the outbuilding wall so they would stay open, and she turned on the flashlight and looked down. The stone steps were solid. She had worried about them in the night, lying in the motel room thinking about what she did not know, but they were cut stone, old and worn smooth at the center where years of feet had passed, and they did not move under her weight. She went down slowly, her left hand against the wall, the flashlight in her right. The cellar was bigger than it had looked from the entrance. The ceiling was 7 feet at the center and dropped toward the walls. The fieldstone walls were dry. The dirt floor was packed hard and free of standing water. The shelves that ran the walls were built of heavy lumber, fitted with wooden pegs rather than nails in the old manner, and they had held their shape across whatever decades they had been down here. She walked to the far corner where the 3 wooden crates sat on their platform of boards. Up close, the oilcloth wrapping was cracked in fine lines, but still fitted tight. Someone had wrapped these crates with care, overlapping the cloth at the corners and securing the edges with tacks. The crates themselves were built of the same heavy lumber as the shelves, dovetailed at the corners. Not crates someone had bought. Crates someone had built specifically for what was going into them. She peeled the oilcloth back from the first crate and worked the lid up. The wood had swelled with age and resisted, but she got her fingers under the edge and worked it methodically, back and forth along the seam, until it came free. Inside, paper-wrapped bundles were stacked in rows. She lifted one out and unwrapped it. Gold coins. She stood in the flashlight's beam and looked at what she was holding and did not say anything for a moment because there was nothing to say. The coins were heavy in her palm, heavier than they looked. They were large coins, $20 denomination, the Lady Liberty face on the front, the eagle on the back, the date 1924 struck cleanly into the surface. The metal was dark yellow, not bright, The color of gold that has sat undisturbed in the dark for a long time and does not need polishing to prove what it is. She set the coin down carefully and counted the bundles in the first crate. 16. She opened 2 more at random. All coins. Some $20 denominations, some tens. The dates she could read ranged from the 1890s through the late 1920s. She found one bundle with coins dated 1928 and 1929 and another with dates from 1921 and 1922. Pre-1933 gold coins. She knew what that meant. She had looked it up once years ago for a reason she could no longer remember, some research for something that had never come to anything, and the information had stayed with her the way information sometimes does when it is attached to the idea of something valuable. In 1933, the federal government had ordered citizens to surrender their gold coins to the Federal Reserve. Most people complied. Some people did not. The coins that had never been surrendered had sat wherever their owners had hidden them, and in the decades since, they had become something specific in the collector market. Coins with a particular provenance, old gold that had simply stayed where it was put. Delia Holt had not surrendered her gold. She had packed it in paper bundles and put it in a wooden crate and carried it down stone steps and left it in the dark. Callie set the lid back on the first crate and moved to the second. The second crate held paper. War bonds, United States Savings Bonds, Series E, issued in the 1940s. She fanned through the stack. The denominations were $25 and $50, each signed on the back in Delia's hand. She did not count them yet. More bundles below. A thicker envelope, sealed, with a date written on the outside in pencil, September 1946. She opened the third crate. A tin box, painted dark green, the kind used for keepsakes. It sat on top of several folded pieces of cloth. She set the tin box on the dirt floor and opened it. Inside, wrapped individually in cloth, a gold brooch with a cluster of small stones she could not identify in the flashlight's beam. A gold wedding band, plain, wide, worn smooth on the inside the way a ring worn for decades gets worn. A pair of earrings, small gold drops. A cameo on a chain. And at the bottom of the tin, under the jewelry, a small book. Not a published book. A handmade one. Cardboard covers, pages sewn together at the spine with heavy thread, the kind of bookbinding done at home by someone who needed to record things and made what she needed. The cover had no title. Inside, on the first page, in the same handwriting, Delia and Holt, her record, begun March 1933. Callie sat down on the dirt floor with the ledger in her lap and the flashlight propped against the wall. She read. The first entry was dated March 12, 1933. Executive order issued. Surrender of gold coins required. I will not surrender what Clement and I saved together. Whatever they say the law requires, this is what we built, and I am keeping it. Entry after entry followed in the same even handwriting, the dates spanning years, some entries only a single line, some running for half a page. Delia had recorded every coin as she added it to the crate, noting the denomination and the date on the coin and the condition and where it had come from. She had recorded the bonds as she purchased them, each one itemized. She had written the purchase price and the denomination and the date of purchase and the maturity date. She had also written other things. Short entries between the financial records, observations about the land and the season and the work. One entry from November 1935. Hard frost took the last of the garden. Children doing well. The land tax notice came again. Paid it. Entry from June 1938. Clement died this morning at 4 o'clock. I have been sitting at the kitchen table since and cannot think of anything to write. The farm is mine now, and the children are mine, and the land is mine, and I will keep all of it. One entry from 1941 was longer than the others. Callie read it twice. They came again from the county about the back taxes. 2 men in a car, dressed like they expected me to apologize for something. I showed them the payment book. I have not missed a payment in 3 years. They said the property had been flagged for review, which I understand means someone has made an inquiry. I do not know who. What I know is that this land belonged to my grandfather and to my father and to Clement and to me, and it will belong to my children, and I will not be apologized into giving it up. Told them to come back with a judge if they had something to say. They did not come back. Callie read through the ledger until the entries thinned and then stopped. The last one dated January 1962. The handwriting was smaller by then, and the lines slanted downward, The change that comes when hands lose their precision but the mind is still clear. The final entry was 3 lines. Sealing the cellar today. Everything in order. Ruth will know what to do when the time comes. She has sensed that girl. She will not waste it. Callie closed the ledger. She sat on the dirt floor in the cold underground quiet with the ledger in her lap and the tin box of jewelry beside her and the stacks of bonds and the wooden crates at her back. And she thought about a woman sitting at a kitchen table in the dark hours of a June morning in 1938 writing that the farm was hers and the children were hers and she would keep all of it. She thought about the 2 men from the county in 1941 being told to come back with a judge. She thought about her mother's letter. I always believed that would be me. But I'm writing this letter instead of going there myself. She gathered everything carefully and replaced it the way she had found it. The ledger back in the tin back in the 3rd crate, the lids back on all 3 crates. She had taken photographs of everything with her phone before she touched it, and she took more photographs as she replaced each item, so that she had a record of what was there and how it had been arranged and in what condition she had found it. She went back up the stone steps into the morning light. The air was warmer than it had been when she went down. The sun had moved while she was in the cellar and was now clearing the cedar stand at the back of the property, coming through at a low angle that hit the gray siding of the farmhouse and made it look almost gold. She stood in the yard and breathed the outdoor air and looked at the farmhouse and the outbuilding and the faint remnants of the old kitchen garden and the rise of the ridge beyond the gate. She had been in the cellar for almost 2 hours. She drove into Millhaven and went to the diner and ordered coffee and eggs and sat at the counter, because the counter was where you sat when you wanted to be in a position to talk to the person on the other side of it. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her 60s, with the easy efficiency of someone who had been working this room for years and knew every rhythm of it. She refilled Callie's coffee before she asked for it, and she did not make conversation until Callie looked up from her cup and said she had a question. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I'm trying to find out about a family that owned land out on Wheeler Creek Road, Callie said. The name is Holt. Delia Holt. The woman's expression changed in a specific way, not surprise exactly, but the look of someone for whom a name has resonance. Delia Holt, she said. Lord, I haven't heard that name in a long time. She leaned against the counter. My grandmother knew Delia. They were friends when they were girls. Grandmother talked about her. What did she say? She said Delia Holt was the most stubborn woman in Harlan County, and she meant it as the highest possible compliment. The woman straightened up and turned to put the coffee pot back. You family. Her granddaughter was my mother, Callie said. The woman turned back and looked at her with a different attention. Ruth, she said. Ruth Marsh. Yes. Delia talked about Ruth. Said she was the sensible one. She put her hand out. I'm June Roundtree. My grandmother was Hazel. Hazel Roundtree. Callie Marsh. June looked at her for a moment. You're out at the Wheeler Creek property? I am, Callie said. June came around the counter when the breakfast rush slowed and sat down 2 stools away with her own cup of coffee, and she told Callie what she knew, which was the kind of knowledge that comes from a grandmother who liked to tell stories and a granddaughter who paid attention. Delia Holt had been born on that land in 1900. Her grandfather had cleared it, and her father had farmed it, and Delia had grown up knowing every inch of it the way you know. Something you have never lived without. She married Clement Holt in 1919 when she was 19 years old, a man from one county over who had come to Harlan looking for farmland and found it, and the woman who went with it in the same season. They farmed together for 18 years, built the farmhouse, built the outbuildings, raised 3 children. Then in the summer of 1938, Clement died of a heart attack behind the barn on a Thursday afternoon in June, and Delia was alone with the land and the children and the debts that a farm accumulates over time. The county tried to take the land, June said. Not once. 3, for times. Some of those years Delia was running on nothing but what the garden produced and what she could sell at the market. But she never let the taxes go. She worked whatever she could work, and she paid what was owed, and she held on to that land. The ledger, Callie said, before she thought better of saying it. June looked at her. She kept records? Detailed ones, Callie said. Going back to 1933. June nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already believed. That sounds right. Grandmother said Delia was meticulous about money. Said she had to be. Said you learn to keep track of every dollar when every dollar is the difference between keeping what's yours and losing it. The gold coins, Callie said, and then she stopped. June looked at her with the steady expression of a woman who had grown up hearing a grandmother talk about Delia Holt and had drawn her own conclusions over the years. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had suspected a thing for a long time and was now hearing confirmation of it. Grandmother said Delia had gold, June said quietly. Said she refused to give it up in 1933 when they made everyone surrender it. Said Delia told her the government was not going to get Clement's savings just because they decided to change the rules. Grandmother thought she was either the bravest person she knew or the most reckless. A pause. Turned out to be brave. She kept records of every coin, Callie said. The date on the coin, the denomination, where it came from. She recorded the bonds the same way. June was quiet for a moment. Outside, a truck pulled in and a man in work clothes came through the door and took a stool at the far end of the counter. June got up automatically to take his order. When she came back, she sat down again and looked at her coffee. Delia lived out there alone until 1971, she said. That was when she moved into town, into one of the county housing units. She was 71 and the farm had gotten too much to manage. But she kept paying the taxes. She never let the taxes lapse. Not once. Not ever. Grandmother said that was the one thing Delia would not bend on. She transferred the property to my mother in 1978, Callie said. The year Delia died. Ruth would have been in college then, June said. 21, Callie said. Delia wrote in the ledger that she had cents, that she wouldn't waste it. June smiled at that. A quick, genuine smile that pulled at something in Callie's chest. That's Delia exactly, she said. Wouldn't give a compliment without attaching a requirement to it. Callie drove back to Wheeler Creek Road that afternoon. She parked at the farmhouse and sat on the front porch steps in the afternoon light, which was warm now, the March sun doing something actual rather than just showing up, and she called a number she had looked up on her phone before leaving Millhaven. The number was for a coin dealer and estate specialist in Roanoke, a firm that had been operating in Virginia for 40 years according to its website, with a specialty designation in pre-1933 American gold coins. A man named Edgar Vass answered the phone, and he had the focused, unhurried manner of someone who dealt with things worth taking seriously. She described what she had found. Not the exact count. The denomination range, the date range, the condition as best she could describe it, the fact that they had been stored in oilcloth-wrapped crates in a sealed underground cellar since at least 1962. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And this is documented? Edgar Vass said. The storage history, the date of last access? There's a handwritten ledger, she said. The owner recorded every coin. Denomination, date, condition, provenance. Starting in 1933. Another pause, longer. I'd want to see them in person, he said. What you're describing, if the ledger is as complete as you're saying, that's not just the coin value. That's a documented collection with unbroken provenance going back to original acquisition. That's a different conversation than loose coins. How different, she said. Considerably, he said. Can you bring the ledger and a sample? I can make time at the end of next week. She said she would call to confirm, and she wrote his name and number in her notebook. She was on the porch steps still when her phone rang. Pamela. She let it ring twice before she answered. Where have you been? Pamela said. I've been calling since this morning. I had things to take care of, Callie said. Gary said there might be something with the estate, Pamela said. Some property that wasn't in the will. He said he read something about a separate deed in the estate filings. Callie was very still on the porch steps. Where did Gary see estate filings? She said. He knows someone at the county clerk's office, Pamela said, with the faint defensive note that appeared in her voice whenever the things Gary knew or did were questioned. He was just looking out for us. For the estate. There might be assets we don't know about. I'm looking into it, Callie said. Looking into it. Pamela repeated. What does that mean? Is there property or not? Callie looked out at the 80 acres in front of her, the old hardwoods along the ridge, the creek glinting through the low ground, the kitchen garden gone to grass, the farmhouse with the gray board and batten siding, and the tin roof catching the last of the afternoon light. I'll let you know what I find, she said. Pamela said several more things, and Callie listened to them and responded with enough words to end the conversation without giving anything away. And then she set the phone down on the porch step beside her. Gary had a contact at the county clerk's office. Gary had married their mother when Callie was 14 and had spent the subsequent years occupying space in their family's life in the way of a man who considered everything around him to be either his or potentially his, and who had developed an instinct for the location of anything that might fall into the second category. Wade Mercer had been here within hours of her arrival. Gary was running inquiries through the county clerk's office. She sat on the porch steps and thought about the timing of things. The letter of interest from Harlan Land Group had been filed 8 months ago. That was after her mother's diagnosis, but before Ruth died, which meant someone had known or suspected that this property would be coming available, had been watching for it. She thought about Delia sitting in this same spot, in a rocking chair that was probably long since rotted away, in the summer of 1941, watching 2 county officials drive back down the track after she had told them to come back with a judge. The land is mine, and I will keep all of it. The farmhouse porch was in poor condition, and she stayed near the end where the boards were sound. The sun was going down behind the ridge to the west, and the light on the property was turning the particular warm gray of a clear March evening. And somewhere in the cedar stand a bird had started up with the repetitive calling that meant the season was shifting. Not summer yet. Not even spring, really. But the bird had not gotten the message and was calling anyway, which was either stubbornness or optimism. And looking at the 80 acres in front of her, Callie thought maybe the distinction between those two things was less clear than it seemed. She would call Edgar Vass to confirm the appointment. She would finish clearing the apartment on Friday and drive home. She would get the probate paperwork filed so the deed transfer was official under her name. She would tell Pamela as little as possible for as long as possible, not out of malice, but out of the knowledge that what was in that cellar was not part of the estate and was not Pamela's to claim. And once Pamela knew about it, Gary would know about it. And once Gary knew about it, the number of people who believed they had a stake in it would grow in ways that served nobody except Gary. She would go back to the cellar one more time before she left, and she would count the coins. She stood up from the porch steps and walked back to her car and stopped and turned and looked at the farmhouse one more time in the fading light. It was a plain thing. Board and batten siding and a tin roof and a porch that needed work and windows boarded from the inside. Nothing that caught the eye from the road, if you could even see it from the road through the trees on the rise. Nothing that said there was anything here worth noticing. That had been exactly the point. A woman who knew how to keep things safe had built something easy to overlook. A woman who had watched the county try to take what was hers had learned that the most protected thing is the thing no one thinks is worth protecting. She had built a plain farmhouse, and behind it a plain outbuilding, and behind that a pair of painted cellar doors. And she had put inside what she had saved across 40 years of hard seasons, and she had covered it and locked it and waited. Then she had given it to someone she trusted to do the right thing with it. Callie's mother had kept that trust for 33 years without spending a dollar of it or telling a soul. And now it was Callie's turn. Edgar Vass had an office above a frame shop on a side street in Roanoke, announced only by the brass plate on the door and the filing cabinets visible through the frosted glass. Nothing in the window, no cases of coins under spotlights. Callie had noticed, driving the 2 hours from her apartment, that the people who dealt seriously in old things rarely advertised what they had. She had spent the week between Harlan County and this appointment doing what she could from a desk, filing the probate transfer paperwork, opening the bank account her mother had left in the jewelry box, and making 3 visits to her own attorney, a woman named Carol Steen who handled estate matters and property law. Carol had reviewed the deed, the probate documentation, and Callie's account of what she had found in the cellar, and had been direct about 2 things. The first was that the property and everything on it had belonged to Ruth Marsh since 1978, and through the estate now belonged to Callie, and that this was not a gray area. The second was that Callie should not discuss the cellar contents with Pamela or Gary until Carol had put certain things in writing. She had taken both pieces of advice. Edgar Vass was a small man in his late 60s with close-cropped white hair and the hands of someone who had spent decades handling things that required precision. He shook Callie's hand and showed her to a chair across from his work table and did not make small talk, which she appreciated. She set the ledger and the sample coins on the table, 8 coins she had selected from the first crate covering the full date range she had noted. He put on a loop and picked up the first coin. He did not say anything for a long time. She waited. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He worked through all 8 coins, examining each under the loop and then setting it on a small velvet pad he had placed at the center of the table. Occasionally, he made a note. Occasionally, he looked something up in a reference book he kept open at his elbow. When he finished with the 8th coin, he set down the loop and looked at his notes, and then looked at her. "The ledger," he said. She slid it across the table. He opened it to the first entry and read. He turned pages slowly, the way he had examined the coins, giving each page the same attention as the one before. He reached the final entry, read it, and closed the ledger and set it on the velvet pad beside the coins. "How many coins total?" he said. "I counted 214, she said. He nodded, as if this were information that fit what he already expected. The date range: 1884 through 1929. I noted the dates from the ledger, a few from the late 1800s that she records as inherited rather than purchased. He picked up the 1884 coin, the oldest of the 8 she had brought. He looked at it under the loop one more time, turned it over, set it back down. "The condition on these is exceptional," he said. "Underground storage in a dry cellar, no exposure to handling, wrapped in paper from the day they went in. That matters considerably in this market." He paused. "The ledger matters more. More than the coins? In the collector market, provenance is value. You have a dated record of acquisition going back to the 1880s for the inherited pieces and a contemporaneous record of purchase for every coin added after 1933. That's documentation most collectors never see. A coin without a story is worth its melt value plus condition. A coin with a documented story is worth the story." She sat with that for a moment. "The war bonds," she said. "Bring me the full inventory from the ledger when you come back with the crates," he said. "Series E bonds from the 1940s, depending on denomination, have been redeemable through the Treasury Department for decades. Some will have stopped accruing interest, some may still carry value. I can help you work through the redemption process." He looked at his notes again. "The jewelry I'd want to assess separately. Without seeing it, I can't say much." "What can you say about the coins?" she said. "Rough range." He was quiet for a moment. A coin dealer's pause, she was learning, was the pause of a man who did not want to name a number he would have to walk back later. "At melt value, current gold prices, the collection would be significant," he said. "But melt value is the floor, not the ceiling. A documented collection of this size and provenance, sold through the right channels to collectors who understand what they're buying, you're looking at a different conversation." He paused again. "I want to see all 214 coins before I give you a number. But I can tell you that the 8 you brought today represent a strong sampling. If the rest of the collection is consistent with what I'm looking at, you're not dealing with a modest windfall. You're dealing with something that will take some time to place correctly, and that will be worth placing correctly." She drove back to her apartment that afternoon and sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about what it meant to be told, in the careful language of a man who did not make promises, that what was in the cellar was worth placing correctly. Her mother had known this. Ruth had kept the property taxes paid for 33 years, driving that number carefully out of a separate account, maintaining a padlock on a cellar door in a county she told no one about. And she had known approximately what was down those stone steps, even if she had honored Delia's instruction not to go down herself. She had carried that knowledge across 3 decades of her life and had not spent it, and had not told anyone, and had set it aside the way you set aside something that is not yet yours to use, something you are only keeping safe. Callie thought about her mother's hands in the last year, the way they shook at the end, the way she had still written carefully, compensating for the tremor, making sure the words were legible. For Callie, when the time comes. The time had come. She called Carol Steen that evening and told her what Edgar Vass had said. Carol listened and asked 2 questions, and then told Callie she was going to put 3 things in writing before the end of the week. A letter to Pamela and Gary's attorney confirming the property transfer and Callie's sole ownership of the Wheeler Creek Road parcel and all contents. A formal notice that any inquiry about the property should go through Carol's office, and a summary of the legal position for Callie to keep in her files. "Gary is going to push," Callie said. "Let him push," Carol said. "There's nothing to push against. The transfer is 33 years old and properly recorded. The cellar contents are part of the property. There is no estate claim. Pamela called on a Thursday morning, and she did not call alone. Callie could tell Gary was in the room because Pamela's voice had the particular over-controlled quality it took on when she was performing certainty for an audience. "We know about the coins," Pamela said. Callie had expected this moment, had thought about it, had decided in advance how to handle it. She did not feel the spike of alarm that used to accompany anything Gary-related. She felt, instead, a kind of settled calm that she recognized as something she had not had access to before this week. "There are coins on the property," she said. "Yes. On property that was part of Mom's estate," Pamela said. "On property that belonged to Mom since 1978, Callie said. "Transferred to her by deed before either of us were born. The estate inherited the property from her, and the property transferred to me through the estate. Carol Steen can walk Gary through the documentation if he'd like." A pause. She heard Gary's voice at a low register, saying something she could not make out. "Gary says the contents of the property should be split between both heirs," Pamela said. "Carol Steen's letter addresses that," Callie said. "Gary should read it." "Callie." Pamela's voice shifted, the performed certainty dropping slightly into something closer to what they had actually sounded like as children. "How much are we talking about?" She had thought about this question too. "I don't know yet," she said, which was true in the specific sense that the final appraisal was not complete. "Edgar Vass is doing a full assessment. When it's done, I'll know more." "Mom kept this from me," Pamela said. It was not quite an accusation, more like a statement of something she was still absorbing. "She kept it from everyone," Callie said. "That's how Delia asked her to keep it. That's how she kept it." Another pause, longer this time. "Who is Delia?" Pamela said. Callie told her. "Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Their great-grandmother. The 80 acres. The Depression, the county trying to take the land. The woman who had said come back with a judge and had kept the property through hard seasons for the rest of her life." Pamela listened in the silence that meant she was actually listening and not just waiting. Gary's voice did not appear again. "She chose you," Pamela said when Callie finished. "Mom chose me," Callie said. "Delia chose Mom. Neither of them did it to hurt anyone. They did it to make sure it got to someone who would know what to do with it." The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before it. Not the silence of resistance. The silence of someone finding their way to something. "What are you going to do with it?" Pamela said. "I'm going to keep the property," Callie said. "And I'm going to handle the collection properly and take the time it takes." She paused. "And I'm going to get the farmhouse stabilized before the roof starts to go." Pamela was quiet for a moment longer. Then, in a voice that sounded more like herself than it had in years, she said, "Delia sounds like she was something." "She was," Callie said. Wade Mercer called the following Monday. She had expected him at some point. He had the persistence of a man whose clients paid him to be persistent, and persistence does not give up after one visit. He was more direct this time. His clients, he said, had an ongoing interest in the Wheeler Creek Road parcel for reasons beyond the land's assessed value. There was mature hardwood on the east-facing slope that a timber company had been watching. There was a mineral survey from 15 years ago that had indicated some possibility of natural gas interest in the lower acreage. His clients were prepared to offer a number that reflected those possibilities. He named it. It was a larger number than his first visit, large enough that she felt the pull of it in her chest, even as she recognized the pull for what it was. "No," she said. "Miss Marsh," he said. And now there was something closer to honesty in his voice. The honesty of a man who has been negotiating for a long time and occasionally sets down the performance to say what he actually thinks. "This is a significant amount of money. It would clear your debt and give you years of stability. What are you going to do with 80 acres in Harlan County?" "Keep them," she said. "The farmhouse hasn't been occupied in decades," he said. "The road access is rough. Restoring that kind of property is expensive and slow." "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She thought he was about to try one more angle, but instead he said, "Your great-grandmother was a determined woman." That surprised her. "You know about Delia? You can't do land work in Harlan County for very long without learning the names that have held ground in this area," he said. "The Holt parcel has been a known quantity for years. Everyone assumed whoever inherited it eventually would take the money." A pause. "I'll be in touch if circumstances change." "They won't," she said. He said goodbye pleasantly, and she believed him, or believed at least that he would not be back for a while. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Edgar Vass completed the full assessment on a Friday in April, 6 weeks after Callie's first visit to his office. She drove back to Roanoke and sat across the work table from him while he walked her through his findings page by page, the same methodical attention he gave to everything. The coins had held up. The full collection was consistent with the sample she had brought in the first visit, and in several cases stronger, for coins in the collection were rare date examples that commanded considerably above the standard price for their denomination, and 2 of those had been documented in Delia's ledger with notes about their acquisition that made the provenance case even cleaner. The war bonds had redeemed at a total value that was smaller than the coins, but not trivial. The jewelry had been assessed by a colleague of Edgar's. The brooch held sapphires, not paste, and the gold content of the pieces was substantial. He turned to the summary page. The total appraised value of the collection, he said, at the conservative end of the range he would stake his professional name on, was $212,000. At the high end, with the right placement for the rare date coins, it could reach $250,000. He recommended a staged approach, selling the bulk of the coins through 2 or 3 established collectors over the course of 6 months rather than moving everything at once, which would depress the price. Callie sat with the number. She had known it was coming. Edgar had been careful about not naming figures before the full assessment, but she had understood from the first visit that what was in those crates was significant. The number she was sitting with now was not abstract. It was the number on her credit cards, the balance on her car loan, the estimate from the Harlan County contractor she had called about the farmhouse foundation, the cost of stabilizing the roof before winter. She ran through it in her mind. She did not need the full amount. She needed some of it, and the rest she could take slowly, the way Delia had accumulated it. There's a collector in Baltimore, Edgar said. He's been looking for a collection of this character for years. Pre-1933 gold with complete documentation. If you want me to reach out, I think he would be a serious buyer for the core of it. Please do, she said. She drove home in the April evening with the summary page in her bag, and the windows down and the radio off. The highway ran through country that looks ordinary at 60 miles an hour and is not ordinary at all if you get out and stand in it. She thought about Delia in 1933 deciding not to surrender what she had built with her husband. She thought about the small handmade ledger, the cardboard covers, and the pages sewn with heavy thread, the first entry on March 12th of a year when the country was afraid of what it was becoming. She thought about her mother paying property taxes every December out of a separate account for 33 years, quiet and faithful, and asking nothing in return. She thought about the 6 words in pencil at the top of the deed, for Callie, when the time comes. The sale to the Baltimore collector took 3 months to complete. Edgar managed it with the same careful pace he had described, moving the collection in sections, giving each piece the time it needed to reach the right buyer at the right price. Callie heard from him periodically with updates, and each update was steady and good. The rare date coins performed above the conservative estimate. The documentation Edgar kept citing as the differentiating factor proved, in practice, to be exactly that. Buyers who understood this kind of collection understood what a complete ledger meant, and they paid for it. By August, 7 months after she had found the jewelry box behind the winter sweaters, the debt was gone. She sat at her kitchen table on a Thursday morning and looked at the number on her screen, the balance of the account Carol Steen had set up for the proceeds, and what she felt was not the rush she had expected. It was something quieter, the relief of ground under her feet. The particular feeling of a pressure that has been present so long you have stopped noticing it until the day it is not there, and the absence is its own sensation. She transferred what she needed to pay off the cards and the car and the balance of the estate attorney's fees and the first payment to the Harlan County contractor who had started work on the farmhouse foundation in June. She kept the rest. She kept Delia's ledger. She kept 4 coins she had chosen from the collection before it went to Edgar. The oldest one, the 1884 piece that Delia had recorded as inherited from her own grandmother, the 1921 double eagle that was the first coin Delia had recorded purchasing herself, a 1925 piece that Delia had noted in the ledger as bought the week after Clement proposed, and the last coin Delia had acquired before 1933, dated 1929, the year before everything began to go wrong. She drove to Wheeler Creek Road on a Saturday in September. The farmhouse looked different in the early fall. The hardwoods along the ridge had started to turn, and the colors came through the gaps in the trees onto the gray siding in a way that made the old boards look warmer than they were. The contractor's crew had finished the foundation stabilization and repointed the porch posts, and the porch itself no longer gave way when she walked to the end of it. The roof had been assessed and patched in the 3 places that were at risk. The house was not beautiful. It was not restored, but it was sound, and it was going to stay standing through another winter, which was what mattered. She walked around to the back and stood at the cellar doors. The crates were gone. Edgar had transported them to his office in Roanoke, and the cellar was now empty except for the old shelves and the few mason jars she had left because they seemed like they belonged there. The painted doors were still painted. She had not repainted them. The black was faded and cracked, but it was the color Delia had chosen, and she had decided to leave it. She lifted the doors and went down the stone steps one more time. The cellar smelled the same as it had in March. Damp earth, something dry above it, the particular stillness of underground air that does not move unless something moves it. She stood at the bottom of the steps and looked at the empty shelves and the platform of boards where the crates had sat. It had done what it was built to do. She went back up into the September sunlight and let the doors rest open behind her. She sat on the porch steps with Delia's ledger in her lap and opened it to the first page. Her record, begun March 1933. She had read it several times by now, but she read it again in the afternoon light, slowly, the way you read something that rewards a second and a third and a fourth reading. The entries were short, most of them. A denomination, a date, a note about condition or origin. But between the financial records, the life of the thing, hard frost took the last of the garden. Clement died this morning at 4 o'clock. They came from the county again. The land is mine, and I will keep all of it. Delia had not needed a fortune. She had needed what every person in uncertain circumstances needs, the ability to decide. To say no when she meant no, and yes when she meant yes without the answer being determined by what she could not afford to lose. She had spent her life building that ability for herself, and when she was done building it, she had given it to her granddaughter. And her granddaughter had carried it for 33 years and passed it forward to the one person she believed would use it right. The afternoon light moved across the porch boards. The hardwoods on the ridge made the sound they make in September, a dry rustling at the higher branches where the leaves have already started to let go. Down the slope, the creek ran its quiet pattern along the northern boundary of the 80 acres, the same creek that had been there when Delia's grandfather cleared this land, the same water moving through the same valley, indifferent to all of it and belonging to none of it. Callie closed the ledger and held it in both hands and looked at the ridge. She was not a farmer. She did not know what she would do with 80 acres in Harlan County in the long run. She did not need to know yet. What she knew was that the debt was gone and the farmhouse was sound, and the cellar had given up what it had been keeping. And what had been done with that keeping was exactly what Delia had intended. It had found the person who needed it, and it had given her the thing that mattered. Not the money, the choice, the ability to decide what came next. She was still learning what that felt like. It felt like sitting on the porch of a farmhouse on 80 acres in the early fall and not being afraid of what the next month would ask of her. It felt like driving 2 hours to an appraiser's office and saying no to a number that was large and meaning it. It felt like finding a jewelry box at the back of a closet and reading a letter and understanding that someone had thought about her very carefully from a very long distance and had made sure the ground was ready when she needed to stand on it. She sat on the porch until the light was low and the ridge had gone dark against the sky, and then she stood and looked at the farmhouse one more time, the way she had looked at it in March when she first came over the rise and saw it. It was the same house, the same gray boards, the same tin roof, the same porch that still needed work beyond what the contractor had done. Nothing had changed about it from the outside. Everything had changed about what it meant. She put Delia's ledger in her bag and walked to her car and drove down the track and through the gate, and she stopped on the county road and got out one more time and looked back up the rise. The farmhouse was not visible from here. The oaks covered it. You could drive this road and never know anything was there. Delia had counted on that, and it had worked. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.